I am by nature a terrible listener. I may have my friends fooled, but my kids know the truth. Part of the problem with my kids is that I've lost some of my hearing. I don't know if it was years on staff as a worship leader trying to sing over blaring wedge monitors or maybe turning my Sony Walkman volume up too high in the 80s, but I can't tell you how many times I ask my kids to repeat themselves because it sounds like they're just whisper mumbling. Any of you have whisper mumblers at your house? But aside from my physical limitations, I also have some brain bandwidth limitations when listening. Like just today, my daughter and I were riding in the car and she said a couple of sentences, neither of which I heard. And I even responded with, yeah. And Kamara was like, Mom, did you even hear what I just said? And I had to admit, actually, I have no idea what you just said. I was totally tuned out and thinking about something else. And I basically had to beg her on all fours to repeat what she had originally said. But even deeper than hearing loss or distractions, however, are the often emotionally immature ways that I engage in conversations, like planning what I'm going to say more than listening, giving advice more than asking curious questions, and rushing through a conversation without taking time to notice someone else's emotions or body language, or just being present in their moment without somehow making it all about me. But I'm giving myself some grace here because unless you're a licensed counselor, most of us have not been trained to listen empathically. But today, in episode number 46, you're going to hear from one of my favorite people, the beautiful and oh so wise Dr. Jackie Perry, on this very topic. This rebroadcast is one of the most downloaded episodes from seasons 1 and 2 of the Unperfect podcast. So I know you'll get a lot out of it as you listen in. Welcome to the Unperfect Podcast. I'm your host, Shelley Sneed, and I help Christian women see glimpses of glory in the now and the not yet of their unperfect lives. If you struggle with fully living the life you've been dealt, congrats, you're officially human, and you're not alone. Hope and probably some humor are coming up. Welcome, Jackie, and thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So, Jackie has some excellent credentials. She's a licensed counselor, supervisor, speaker. She's the author of a fantastic book for parenting teens that you all need to go and purchase once we're done here with the podcast. And I'll let her share a little bit more about her background, but I wanted to share how I first discovered Jackie. I was at a women's conference for a local church in our area, and I went to her breakout session entitled Promoting Rest Through Resets in the Home. And I was floored by the strategies and just the insights and the way I needed to be relating to my kids and everyone in my family. I still have my handout. It's tattered and battle scarred from me accessing it all the time and notes I've written in it. But anyway, I went home and found out she was in the area. So I stalked her on the internet. And I don't know what my actual email on her website was, but I was thinking in my head, my family needs you. Please don't say no, Jackie. So I highly respect her. And I'm also just thrilled that now I can call her my friend. So thank you for being here, Jackie.
Very kind. I forgot about that title of that seminar. I was like, oh, that sounds like a good breakout.
That's a good one. You should do that again sometime. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are and your background? Because I know that might help lead into the topic of our conversation today.
Sure. Yeah, so I have been a counselor for about 32 years, primarily working with adolescents and families, and sort of stumbled into that work and realized I loved big bad attitudes and had no problem working with that posture in the therapy room. About 8 years ago, I decided to go back and get my PhD in counseling education, or to become a counselor educator. I think I felt like I was time to transition out of the field and begin to equip the next generation of counselors. And so I did that in 2020. I graduated with many others in the pandemic, watching my name and my picture on a screen, standing there proudly. And I've been I've been teaching in grad school since 2017. Yeah, 2017 fall, which is significant to what we're going to talk about in terms of this training that I offer. I'm also the mom of 3 adult children. 2 are married, and I married my college sweetheart, who we met at Duke University. And I'm only saying that because Duke surprised us all last night and beat Clemson in
Nice.
football. Yeah, yeah,
Very nice.
yeah.
You get a win whenever you can, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly.
So when I first heard about this empathic listening course, that training that you were doing, I'm not sure I fully understood what it was all about. In fact, I remember telling a friend, I'm going to sign up because even if she's just talking about how to make peanut butter and jelly, it's going to be great. Like, I just loved the way that you teach and the insights that you have. I quickly learned that my idea of being like a good listener was so far from this idea of empathic listening that I realized what I'm really doing is thinking of what I'm going to say and what advice I'm going to give. So tell us exactly, what is empathic listening and how does it differ from other types of listening?
Yeah, so ultimately, empathic listening is something we teach counselors, and it is different than just the listening that we do every day. And so when we talk about empathic listening, we're not just listening to the words of another person. We're really kind of using our mind, body, and spirit to tune into their mind, body, and spirit. So it's a whole to whole kind of conversation. And it takes some training, it takes some intention, it takes what we talk about in the class, attunement, learning to sort of notice and be real intentional about what's happening in me, what's happening in them in certain dimensions, and putting that together. And so it is not a natural way of listening. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. And I learned that quickly in this course because I remember even one of the first weeks when we were practicing this with our groups, we weren't even allowed to say anything as the person was
Mhm.
talking. So you were literally having to hold your tongue because we're so used to speaking. At least I was personally. That was probably the hardest thing for me. But clearly, this type of listening has a deep impact on the speaker, the person that we are listening to in that conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about how it impacts their experience, the experience of the listener, or even the story that they're telling us or sharing about?
Yeah. So one of the things that you were just saying is kind of relevant to that. So when we don't speak and we work hard at like learning not to speak and practicing this first step, we begin to notice that we're already constructing what we want to say, the experiences that match the speaker. And there's a letting go that begins to happen slowly over time, where I let go of what my agenda is, or what my thoughts are that naturally come, or what my inclination is to solve, or whatever it is. And I fully kind of blend, not fully, but I merge a little bit more intentionally with what the person is experiencing. And that may not seem like it's really important, but when we're the speaker, we don't always know what we're experiencing emotionally. We don't always know what we're saying. We don't always notice the gestures that we have physically. And so if I'm sitting across from somebody who's attuning to that and they respond to that in some way, I noticed you got teary when you mentioned your mother. You must be feeling blah, blah, blah. It helps me as the speaker put those pieces together. And those pieces are what am I feeling? What are some of the key thoughts that I have or beliefs that I have? What am I physiologically sensing in my body? What kind of images from my past are coming alive? And so all of those create a coherent story for the speaker. And we want to foster that. We want to foster coherence in storytelling. Kind of jumping ahead of myself a little bit, Shelley, but I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, yes, no,
Okay,
that's
okay,
great.
okay.
And yes, and I remember in the when we would be practicing this in the course, there were times that the speaker, in just either restating what I had said, like summarizing it, I was able to connect dots I hadn't connected before in my own story. Or the listener noticed, "Oh, you're feeling this way." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, you're exactly right. I am. That is what I'm
Yeah,
feeling." Because
yeah,
sometimes I think we don't know quite how to name it. We just are in the moment. At least for me, like I don't always think about what exactly am I feeling. I just, I don't
Yeah.
really have words for it. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was
Yeah, I'll interject there too. I mean, I think fundamentally, before even just putting things together and putting pieces together, we all have the desire to feel seen and heard, right? And so when
right.
somebody responds to us in a way that we feel seen and heard, that's often a blessing. And to be very candid, it's often uncomfortable too. It's like, oh, I feel very seen right now and
Right.
very heard. I didn't even know that I was carrying that, and you saw that. And so it is both wonderful and often uncomfortable.
Yes, very true. Very true. And then I also noticed that when I was practicing this, and still I notice this now, I'm just going back to the course where we had some really intensive, intentional ways to practice this. That I, as the listener, was deeply impacted when I was practicing this empathic listening. So why is that? And what are some of the ways we're impacted as the listener when we are in these conversations where we're really attuned and listening empathically?
Yeah, as the listener, I think part of what we need to remember is stories activate stories. And so any story being told is always activating our story. And so, when you're telling me about your relationship with your son or your daughter, it immediately brings to mind anything that may be similar, maybe not specifically exactly the same way, but something about what you're saying is activating an emotion, experience in me. And that's actually beneficial for me because I can tap on that, not so that I can share that with the person, but because it also fosters connectivity in me and awareness of, oh, this is something that I'm noticing in me. And so it kind of can activate my own work. One of the things that's associated with well-being, Shelley, is or flourishing as humans is something called integration, connections across the mind and the body. And so when I practice this with somebody else and I'm listening in this way, I'm actually benefiting in that I'm making those connections in myself and growth is happening. And what I like to call flow, just sort of the inside is equaling the outside, and this sort of, I'm fostering some personal growth in me. So I think that's one of the biggest.
And Jackie, while you were talking, I was remembering a time when I was listening to someone else in our group, and I've adopted children, and they had mentioned adoption. And I don't know if I actually said it or told you I was thinking about saying this, but whatever it was, that the way I was going to respond, one of the things you pointed out was, and I've heard you say this on multiple occasions, don't put your story on her story, or don't.
Mm.
It's such a natural tendency for me to take my story and want to say, this is what you should do because this was my experience. I just came away from that course with a greater awareness that it doesn't matter how similar they may seem. Everybody's story is so unique. And I have
Mm-hmm.
to give space and room for that person to experience their own story,
Mm-hmm.
to come to their own conclusions. And that was really powerful for me.
Yeah, I think if you think of stories as an object coming into the room, we want to create a lot of room for the speaker's story. And when we put our story in there, and there is a place for that,
Sure.
but for the most part, we want to keep it at a distance. We create a lot of room so that people don't hide, and that's what we do. We live our lives hiding our stories or parts of our stories. We don't think that we can take up the space. We don't think that there's room for mine to be seen or accepted, or it would be judged. And so we want to create a lot of space in the room or in the relationship so that story can open up and develop. And that's a good principle. When we kind of open up and move away from hiding, we're moving hopefully towards health. That person, anyways, we're inviting that person to move towards health.
Absolutely. Okay, so we know a little bit about what empathic listening is, but talk to us a little bit about why it matters, particularly in this time that we're living in. You alluded to this earlier, both COVID and everything else.
Yeah, goodness, I can talk about it from a micro level and a macro level. I think I'll talk about it from a macro level first. We are in the midst of, and I think we were here really before COVID, but a mental health crisis in our nation. In fact, I know that we were here. It was related to my dissertation, which was happening before the pandemic. We are in the midst of, just many, many, many issues. We're seeing them in colleges. We're seeing them in young people. We're seeing them across different age groups with not just mental health issues, but people really acting out in dangerous ways towards themselves or others. We also are in the midst of a loneliness epidemic. The Surgeon General Vivek Murthy just posted 6 to 8 weeks ago a pretty lengthy study that said that up to 1 in 2 Americans is experiencing measurable levels of loneliness, and loneliness is the factor in research that is measuring my lack of feeling seen and known. My lack of feeling seen and known. And so loneliness is associated with that. So when we talk about 1 in 2 not feeling seen and known, that's pretty scary. I'll add a new statistic that's been out. It's not that new, but it's getting a lot of coverage. I keep seeing it. There's some newer research that's saying up to 1 in 4, I think it's younger people, are estranging themselves from their parents. How is that related? Well, I think there's a thread in there. We don't know how to engage with people who are different with us, and there are certainly reasons for estrangement, all of that. But listening plays a role in moving through conflict, moving through differences, honoring the fact that I don't agree with you or I'm not on the same page with you, but I can still be in a relationship with you. And that's statistics troubling when you think about up to 25% of people in the younger age group are estranging themselves. So we have a huge problem culturally. We have a huge problem in the United States, and some of these statistics are really global as well. So that's the macro. You want me to move to the micro? Because I'll be happy to talk about like why. Yeah. So why does it matter for the individual, the speaker? What does it do for them? Well, it does so many things. Fundamentally, it feels extremely wonderful to feel seen and known. We were made for that. We were designed by a God that created us for this longing, within us. But one of the things that happens, which is pretty cool, is that we know that neurobiological shifts, and I'll explain what I mean by that, begin to happen in the speaker as they feel heard. So when Shelley's listening to me and I'm telling my story, if this is a story where there's any discomforting feelings attached to it, any distress, I'm already going to predict how she's going to hold space for me. I may predict that she is going to give me a lecture. She may look away because she's bored. She's going to insert herself. And so when she doesn't do those things, when she is compassionate, when she allows me to cry and lament, grieve, not have an answer, be angry, whatever it is that I'm sharing with her in my story, she actually begins to shift some expectation in my neural pathways of what happens and how I see myself and how much space is out there for my story. If I'm expecting judgment and she gives me something very different, my ability to sort of see the story differently, see myself differently, even see God differently, which is pretty powerful. She's reflecting this love and presence and kindness and compassion that is a reflection of something greater than me and even greater than her that I can now experience so that I can see my story in a new way. We talk a lot about restoring in the work of counseling, but even in the work of listening, it allows somebody to look at a story in a new way. And that's important because usually the way we remember things is not quite accurate. So we want to look back and sort of restore it in a way that is more truthful and more helpful for us to actually be able to cope with whatever really happened. Yeah.
Yes. And Jackie, I was thinking as you were talking about it, when you were mentioned children being estranged from their parents, and then just how that shift in your expectations when you're expecting someone, how they're going to respond. And in parenting, I think that one of the first times I heard you really talk about this, even when I didn't know it was called empathic listening, you were just encouraging us to, when our kids, let us know something is going on. I hope it's not just me. I think most of us as parents want to jump straight to fixing it. So that was just kind of mind-blowing for me to go, wow, that's a really big feeling. What was that like, to be curious instead of wanting to jumping to the advice to fix it? Because that was so contrary to everything I've ever done as a parent or
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
even
yeah.
thought I was supposed to do. I thought it was my job to advise on every situation, but especially with as they're in these teenage years and getting older. And I remember as a listener during that course, and I remember one day I was sharing my story, and it was just a bunch of overwhelm that I was experiencing. And honestly, the listener, she didn't give me advice. She kind of retold my story, named what I was feeling, and just gave me a lot of space. And I literally remember leaving there and sitting in my car, and I knew what I needed to do next. Like, I had an
Mm,
action
mm,
step. She didn't
mm-hmm.
tell me, you have too much on your plate, you should do this, this, and this. But just having the space to process that all um, verbally to someone, and just have them give me the space to listen, that was so powerful. So that shift that
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about, like, I went from being overwhelmed to being able to formulate a plan to help myself in that
Yeah.
situation. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
and that, yes, it does. And that plan that was formulated was coming because you had synaptic connections, pathways in your brain being put together in the most meaningful way. And it's powerful when it comes from you and not being placed on you by me telling you what to do. It's also like, I like to think of metaphors all the time for this kind of thing. And the thing that comes to mind right now in this moment is it's almost like coming into the sandbox with somebody, and we're sitting in the sandbox, and the sandbox represents the story they're telling, and we're sifting and we're looking and we're noticing and we're sort of talking about the pieces of the story. And it may be that that when I sit in there for a while, it may be that the person really wants me to help them put together a plan, but I
Right.
won't even know what that is until we've sat in the sandbox, metaphorically speaking, for a while, so that I feel with them and I don't run ahead and kind of go, I know what you need to do because I've been in this. And you haven't. None of us have. Our stories are completely different because of the stories we bring into our stories. The story of my past coming into my parenting of my three children is unique to me. Yeah, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of self-control, right?
Yes, very
Yeah,
much
yeah, yeah,
so. And I
yeah.
am not great at it by any means yet. You can ask any of my children. So but it is something I'm constantly trying to remember to practice. Now, I have heard you say often in these types of conversations and different times that we've been together, or I've heard you speak, that we as listeners have the opportunity to reflect the witness of God, which I love that phrase. So I do think it's important to talk about this. Isn't just some modern psychology mumbo jumbo stuff at its finest. Like, this is also, it truly relates to God's plan for connection to each other, for us with each other, and to Him. So, can you talk? You kind of mentioned it a second ago, but can you talk a little
Yeah,
bit about
yeah.
how empathic listening does this?
Yeah, so I'll go back to just what we talk about when we say the witness of God. So when we talk about Emmanuel with us, Jesus came in the flesh. And then when he rose again, we have this Holy Spirit that lives within us as believers. And that is felt within us and between us. And we can actually rob that process. And so when we open up ourselves, because again, there is a letting go on the part of a speaker to sort of trust that I can hold this story, trust God's presence in that holding. And when I remove those barriers of what I'm going to say or what I think I should say, there is this flow that happens even out of me that the other person experiences. You've heard me say, Shelley, one of the things that we long to see is the gaze of God in others, which is this like delight that we see in the eyes of somebody who's sitting with us. This love, compassion, and presence. And so when I can listen to somebody in this way, they really do get a taste of the Father flowing through us, the Spirit flowing through us. And it is, I think, one of the most powerful ways to help other people experience who God is being embodied in the flesh, being this person that holds space in a way that there is this felt sense of God in the room because of the way that I'm caring for their story, the way that I'm seeing them physically as well as emotionally. all of that. And so we get the opportunity to reflect the witness, the presence of God, when we really reflect who he is to us, the way he sees us, the way that he, from the very beginning, went after us, even when we, when we, Adam and Eve made a decision to disobey, he still went looking for them. And so this gaze and this pursuit is something we get to capture in the way that we listen.
Yes. And Jackie, I was just thinking as you were talking about that, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, the first thing God does is ask them a question. He doesn't come right down with the lecture and here's what you do. Now he gets to the point where he has to talk through those things with them.
Right.
But the first thing he does, as you said, is go looking. But he also says, where are you? He's like giving them a chance to come out of hiding, which you were talking about, and
tell the story.
Tell the story. Yes, I love that. So I want you to talk a little bit about the SoulWell Center, which I don't even think we've mentioned yet, which you are the president of. Is that your official title?
Founder and president. Yeah, that's funny. I didn't mention that in the beginning.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about that, and what how it came about, what your hopes, your dreams are for all that God can do with this.
Yes. So, yeah, that's funny. I didn't bring it up. So when I started teaching in grad school in 2017, the first course I was given to teach was a class called Counseling Skills. And it's the class that counselors have to take before they go into the field to do their practicum and then their internship. And it is essentially where they're practicing in triads, these skills each week that are built. And it's called a micro skills hierarchy. And as I was teaching that class, and I had to take it back in the 80s, 90s when I went to graduate school myself, but as I was teaching that class, it really just occurred to me, wow, everybody needs to take this class. This is a great class, particularly was feeling strongly that the church, what a great opportunity for the church to be able to take this kind of a class and really reflect the presence of God wherever they go, in their families, their workplaces, and their communities. And we don't even have to say his name because of the way we're holding space. So the dream began then. I started talking to other counselors about it, actually quite a few. And they were like, gosh, I've seen so many people that are really just coming in because they don't have a safe place to be seen. And I'm not doing a whole lot of counseling as much as holding space for their, stories of the week or whatever. So there's some momentum, 2017, 2018, and started praying about that. And then the pandemic sort of slowed us down. But last fall, finally put together a pilot course and thought, well, let's just see if we train ordinary people who don't have a counseling degree, although there were some counselors there. I think there were 23 in that first class. And what would it be like if we set it up pretty similarly and also added mental health nuggets that would be little snapshots of things that counselors get throughout their training in 2 to 3 years of grad school. Things from understanding the nervous system and its role in being a listener, right brain, left brain, bottom up, attachment. That's a huge one. What is the soul? Understanding the power of story. We talk about the grand narrative of scripture at the very beginning. Trauma, depression, anxiety, addiction, you name it, we talk about it. So combining those two in a course. So we did it, and it was really satisfying to me personally to see ordinary people really sort of gain these ahas in their family. Shelley, I remember you talking about your intention to practice it every day or a certain number of times a day. And the story you shared with us about the barista at Starbucks, and just like this first story just opened up and you're like, oh gosh, this really works. Yeah. So it's really neat. So that's what the SoulWell Center is now. We are equipping listeners. We are nurturing intentional community by creating some groups. We launched a group based on Kurt Thompson's Being Known model that is a confessional community. We will continue to do those. And then lastly, we're collaborating with any organization, be it a private organization or a nonprofit organization, schools, etc. Doing a group of women at a church next week that are doing a 5-hour intensive, just diving into some of this empathic listener training. So we're trying to tailor it to the needs and the focus of an organization, whether they want it more secular or more faith-based, shorter, longer, those kinds of things. So it's threefold: equipping, nurturing, and collaborating. And I'm really excited about it. It's so much fun.
another friend and I were in that first class, and I can see a difference just in the class, in our small group at church, just that we are able to be hold space in a different way than we probably were before. Because she and I both are these, let me give you all the advice that I have learned, instead of let me give you some space to share your story and process it. And let me really be attuned to what you're feeling and all that. I mean, it's really, I have seen it change the dynamic of conversations we've had with other believers in the church. And like you said, I think people are just hungry for that opportunity to be seen, to be truly heard.
Yeah, it makes me smile. The listeners can't see me, but I'm smiling because sometimes this work can be overwhelming when I think of those numbers I shared earlier, 1 in 2 and loneliness, mental health crisis. But I think this is how positive change happens. It happens with one person at a time, impacting another person, a group of people. And that's exciting. And there is a domino effect when people begin to experience this way of listening. They get a model for what that looks like, and it passes on. So slowly but surely, I do hope and pray that the SoulWell Center and any other ministry like the SoulWell Center that is offering this kind of training for ordinary people would really slowly impact our families, our communities, our churches, etc.
Jackie, thank you so much for hanging out with me today on the podcast. You're truly one of my favorite people, and I'm so grateful for you and your ministry. And I just look forward to all that God's going to do with the SoulWell Center. And I hope that listeners can take away some little nuggets that they heard today and start putting it into practice in their conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. It's such a joy to be here with you, Shelley. I really appreciate it.
Well, Jackie shared so much insight with us on why empathic listening is effective and important for us to put into practice with people in our families, small groups, churches, and even people we come in contact with in our communities. Is a powerful way to represent Jesus because people are longing to be seen and heard and desire to see, as Jackie said, the gaze of God, which we can offer. If you want a few practical strategies for listening empathically, you'll find some in episode number 29, Healthy Ways to Listen to the Stories Others Tell. And I'll link to that episode in the show notes. If you'd like more information about the SoulWell Center, head over to thesoulwellcenter.com. There are empathic listener training classes for those who live locally, confessional community groups, and as Dr. Perry shared, also she's available to train businesses and ministries in this type of thing as well. You can even partner with the SoulWell Center by giving financially to further the work and ministry of the SoulWell Center. I'll link to all that in the show notes. If today's episode impacted you, I would love to hear about it. Let me hear from you by subscribing at ShelleySneed.com. And please take a moment to share this episode with a friend that you know will enjoy it too. And if you're listening to this episode before July 2nd, 2024, there's still time to complete the listener survey and enter to win a gift card to Starbucks or Amazon. I appreciate your quick feedback so I can minister to you more effectively and be a better steward of your time. So that link is also in the show notes. Lots of good stuff in the show notes today. Make sure you check them out. As always, I'm praying you are able to see glimpses of glory in the now and the not yet of your unperfect life, and that you'll be the gaze of God in a conversation as you listen in a new empathic way to someone who's longing to be seen this week. See you next time.